I like to describe that inner voice as your inner monologue. So you have that train of thought that's running through your head, and you have between 40 and 50,000 thoughts every day. They move really fast. And a lot of us live in a reactionary state and believe that we've no input or much control over those thoughts that come through our awareness. And that is fundamentally incorrect. And you have to build up the muscle and what we call mental fitness to be able to understand and shape those thoughts.
All right, man, let's get into it. So you've had a pretty exciting career in tech and all kind of fintech related, but I suppose when you kind of started in 2010 in particular, it wasn't that well known, I think. So what was the kind of the background for yourself to kind of break into that kind of space?
The background was I didn't know what I wanted to do at all. And when I was leaving school in 2006, I'd done work experience in fourth year, and that kind of actually just gave me clarity that I didn't want to go in those career directions, which obviously was a real gift looking back on it, because I wanted to do architecture, and I had a great work experience. Anyway, all that meant was when I left 6th year, I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I just played it relatively for the optionality. I just wanted as many options as possible when I came out of college. So I just went in and did commerce and UCD, which was what everyone suggests is one of the best baseline degrees you can do. So when I came out of commerce, I still didn't know what I wanted to do. And I liked the marketing side of that course. And I did okay in commerce in general. So I was fortunate enough to get offered a place in Smurfit Business School, and that gave me an avenue to keep exploring then the area of commerce that I liked the most. And I was buying time. I didn't know what I wanted to do. And obviously in that time period, the global financial crisis came and hit Ireland for absolute six. And from the time I went into college, when I finished, I went from going in being told you're going to walk into any job you want if you get this result in commerce, and then you come out and everyone's like, nope, no jobs here. What are you going to do? And I was fortunate enough to have met an entrepreneur who lived in Southern California while I was traveling during one of my college summers, and he and I built up a good relationship, and he offered me a job in Southern California in sales. So he had a sales team of about there was maybe 13 in total, and they were in insurtech basically, and they built a new way of aggregating insurance data to be able to bring on businesses. And I didn't really I had great relationship with him, and I didn't really care about the industry I was going to go in. I just wanted a new experience. I wanted to get into, everyone always said I'd be good at sales. I was like, sure, that sounds like a good idea. And I left and went over there, and that was the beginning of I don't know, my 10 plus years in B2B sales, and always for smaller companies, I suppose, startups in the loose definition of the term. And yeah, that's kind of how I got into it. I suppose out of not knowing what else to do and following the opportunities. I think there's so much in that, follow the opportunities that end up opening up for you.
Of course.
Which
imagine comparing that to just picking a degree that you get told to do, or coming out and doing a grad program. Because it's funny you said about being like completely unoblivious, because I think a lot of people, especially myself, also hadn't a fucking clue what they wanted to do, but they still picked something that was like kind of handed to them. So I'll give you an example. Like I came out of college, went into consulting, Big Four firm, thought I was going to be the best thing ever. It was actually shit. And then like 15 months later, I was trying to get out and go somewhere else, So at least you kind of had that kind of opportunity to say, I want to go. You had like a good of a network to go out to the States. Now that isn't really available for young people anymore, but it's good because then you get out there and you're like, okay, thank fuck it, and go to those big companies or do something I didn't want to do.
Yeah, but I mean, I didn't have that network either when I left school. You just got to get out and travel as much as possible. I think when you are young enough to not care where you're sleeping and you can travel cheaply, when you get to 30 plus, it's so hard to be able to find the fun in that as much. And so when you're kind of in your late teens, early 20s, like get out there and just do and meet as many people as possible. You never know what's going to come of it. And no matter what, if nothing comes of it, there's a lot of growth in it. So I'd be a massive supporter of that approach to every college summer, just getting the hell out of wherever you are for as long as possible. But obviously that's harder for some people if they have some commitments potentially. So yeah,
Yeah.
you never know what opportunities are going to open up. You need to give
Yeah.
yourself the space to experience them.
100%. I remember I was the exact same in college. I was trying to just go as far out as possible every year because there's no opportunity cost. When you're getting
Mm.
older and you get into your career, like I'm 25 now, and you're always thinking like the opportunity cost. I could take a couple of years out, and this is why it's just best to do it when you're young. Because there's no other alternative. I just piss about on the beach for a couple of years, or just enjoy it, because soon enough, it's not that you can't do it anymore. It's just that like you don't want to be that creepy 30-year-old in a fucking corner of a hostel, do you? You just have the opportunity.
There's that, and there's also the factor of, if you live in the UK or Ireland, like where I grew up, you might end up in a relationship, and if you're in a relationship with a girl or a woman, then they have a certain timeline on things as well, and your options reduce as you get towards that 30 mark, unless you're single. And so you need to consider that timeline into it as well. Me myself, I always knew I really wanted to be a dad down the line, so I felt that I had a window of time before I needed to focus on that mission, if you get me. So trying to maximize the window or the life stage in your early 20s, when you have next to no responsibilities and just a real love for having fun, knowing that window is going to close. And when that window does close, you can't go back. And that probably is a benefit of having older siblings, but I believe in that massively.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think a lot of people aren't even thinking that, and then it just kind of hits them in the face. But you've kind of had both aspects of it, though. You're out in California, working tech company, kind of similar to myself, just kind of like submersed in those kind of small tech firms. And then, you went on and worked in multiple different locations. It could have been Singapore, it could have been Hong Kong, and then you started getting like more and more overworked. But like, what were some of the early stages for you? So, you went on to build Frankie now, and you can give a bit of a background to that as well. But like, was there kind of more like party as well as working really hard? And I suppose that kind of combined to everything, because that's very much kind of tailored towards a lot of young people as well. They're working hard, but they're also out and kind of partying a lot.
The short answer is 100%. I mean, I was trying to maximize fun, party and sessioning, whatever you want to call it, as much as possible. And Ireland, you can only experience so much in a small place like Dublin or Ireland, and then you're looking for new experience and meeting new people and new social environments. And yeah, I kept trying to push that out, and it was always how can I balance this with trying to actually get somewhere professionally and career wise. And thankfully I did constantly like focus on that balance, because there would have been opportunities to go to other places with friends and people that were maybe going off, interrailing or whatever it might have been. But if you can, I always worked everywhere that I went for a summer as much as possible as well.
Yeah.
So that balance is hard to find, especially if you've got, maybe you have some friends that have more money than you, and they don't need to work, or they don't need to consider that, and you want to hang out with your mates, but they have a different set of objectives or limitations. So that it ends up being a point where you just have to make the decision for you and be happy going somewhere by yourself, and not need that circle of friends that, if you're lucky enough to have that from school or college or whatever, it's like, well, at some stage it's got to go. And when you're by yourself in a new place, you're so much more integratable. Like, you get invited to so much more stuff, and
100%.
it's way easier to make friends and then make network, which lead to work opportunities. So yeah, I think people struggle with that. If you're definitely from Ireland, we like being around people that we know sometimes, especially if we're overseas. You find Irish people hanging out with Irish people in other cities. And for me, it was always like, why would I do that? I went to San Francisco and introduced the Irish network or whatever, and everyone's like, oh, we're going to watch this match on telly and in this Irish pub. And I was like, no, I left everyone I know to get away from this and experience something new.
Yeah.
Why would I go there?
It's exact same in Australia as well. Like, everyone goes kind of comes together, which, whatever, it's like a familiarity bias. People want to be around each other, but like, it's in those actually moments whereby you've completely disconnected from like your family, your friends, where you get most creative, and I think that's a big thing that I kind of saw in you as well. You're kind of like very kind of like different, creative, had a lot of kind of cool ideas coming in the road. And I think it's definitely just being from submersed in different locations. Like, and that's where you get a lot of, ideas from as well. Because if you meet someone from San Fran or you meet someone from wherever, it's like, oh, they have a similar issue that I have. It could be an idea for a platform, could be an idea just for a small business idea, or it could just be something that's enjoyable. And that's what's really, really cool. So I suppose when you're balancing with your career, you're always thinking that kind of way forward. But there's also just the idea of just learning shit and just picking up new stuff.
Yeah, big time. I think you've hit the nail on the head there, Darren. And there's so many great examples of that. For me personally, like I was using Headspace in 2012. I think I only started in 2010, or they launched the app version in late 2010. They were previously doing like live seminars at lunchtimes in London, and then the lads moved over to LA. But like that was a great example of like, oh, whoa, there's a whole industry in this concept of mental health and trying to find clarity in your thoughts. And that was definitely a benefit of being in somewhere new in California, essentially. And the other example, which is so obvious, is like Rocket Internet, if you've ever heard of them, which were a couple of German brothers that set up this consultancy in the early 2000s. And basically they raised a venture fund, and then they were their whole mission was finding a model in a different market and copying it with money in a kind of fresh market, if you will. And they copied Airbnb straight off the bat, and it's a great story if you read that one, where the founders of Airbnb went over to Germany when they're expanding into Europe, and they realized there was these guys that copied their whole model, and they were like, do we buy them or do we work with them, and so forth. And ultimately they didn't work with them because they were absolute dicks. But that's a great example of how there is such opportunity in just seeing what's going on in other markets and other parts of the world, and seeing if there's any space.
It's like customer feedback, but actually being there and doing it, and then you're getting like an actual first-hand experience. I think what was kind of cool with that as well is I remember the kind of example I'm thinking of is like Tim Ferriss. So, he was similar enough to you. Actually, he was in a tech sales role that was in San Fran, and he was like, 15 hours a day. He was sleeping under his table. I think he actually was in Oracle. I could be wrong about that, but I thought that's where he was in sales. Then he started his own company. And then he was again doing more work. He's gone now from 15 hours to like 16, 17, 18 hours a day, not sleeping, overworked. And then it was only when he just started like outsourcing everything. This is back in 2004 now, before like outsourcing became a thing. Then he was doing a lot of traveling all across Asia. He was all across South America. As then he realized, okay, it's not this, echo chamber of Silicon Valley that I want to spend my life in. There's a world outside there. And then that's when he went on to just do completely different things. And he was a pioneer for like experimental stuff. So that's why he was his own guinea pig. And I think that was really cool. So I got into him around first year of college, so probably 2015. And I started seeing things slightly differently. So I wasn't necessarily traveling, but I was kind of like, oh, there's this dude who's off doing his own thing. He's not listening to the narrative. He's not following the traditional path. And as a result, he's doing so well because of it. So it's interesting because even what we're doing now, podcasting, like obviously podcasting, there's a lot of people doing it, but doing it from your own specific lens without looking at other people and comparing yourself to others leads you to potentially doing it better or doing it on your own accord.
Yeah. And it takes comfort with risk, essentially.
Yeah.
And there's all different types of risk in that context. You financial risk because you're leaving whatever consultancy maybe you got a job straight out of college for. You have to leave your friends and your family, so that there's social risk, and then there is just comfort. Like you're not, maybe you have to work those hours, and maybe you don't have a car, and maybe you have to get the bus more often, and all those things. Like, and I go back to the life stage thing. I think in certain life stages you have to take more risk because you've less to consider, and I think I wouldn't say that I buy into the concept that you shouldn't go to college and take more risk when you're that young. But I think in the post-college age bracket, after you've got a couple of years experience, between sort of 27, we'll say, and 34 loosely, like that's a period to take more risk. And if you have that itch inside of you to start your own business or try something a little bit outside of the box, whatever that might mean to each individual, that's a great stage to do it, because you might have some money saved up. You should have some money saved up, and you're potentially going to move into a long-term relationship in a few years' time, and that's double down on the risk when you can. So yeah, it does take
narrow window
risk.
Yeah, it's interesting because like when you're working to live, or else like you're not like saving aggressively, like that should be like where you have that window to go and take those opportunities, and I guess, I don't know, guess kind of leverage up on that risk, and then hopefully you'll pay dividends to it, or else you can take that and go somewhere else afterwards. I often see in startups, people will join after a failed, quote unquote, failed startup, but they're in a great position because they've learned how to build a platform, they've learned how to solve customer pain points, and so on and so forth. So getting into some of the kind of factors that beyond like your kind of career. So, when you're in the early stages and you're working really hard, you had a couple of issues around kind of stress, overworked, a lot of kind of like, I don't know, a lot of those kind of negative aspects to it. What was some of the kind of like, I don't know, the real kind of kickoff and events that happened, a lot of this stuff? Why was it that you kind of went into that kind of negative space?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so that would have been in about 2013. And I was been in California about 3 years at that stage. And I had been doing well with work and had been having a lot of fun outside of work, a lot of partying, a lot of late nights, and
Mhm.
trying to maximize all objectives, we'll say. And
Same as me.
then I was working for kind of like two startups, neither full time, neither was funded. One was an idea, one had some revenue, and yeah, just struggling for money in San
Mhm.
Francisco because we thought we had a fundraise sorted, but then the investor pulled out, and I was then like just working insane hours. I started convincing myself that I just needed to open up more windows of time, and thought I could just cut out the sleep window, for instance, and got that down to 5.5 hours, something like 5.5, 6 hours, like all the time, and then sometimes less. Then you're out in the weekend trying to forget how stressed you are by overindulging, and that makes it a negative kind of vortex or cycle even more. And I was in a long-term relationship at the time, for about 2+ years, maybe 3 years, and then because I wasn't not fulfilling my role in the relationship, I wasn't very present, and I was thinking about other things, and I was working too much, and I wasn't around on the weekends either, and I was just being a bad boyfriend essentially. And
Mhm.
so that relationship ended, and quite abruptly. And then I found myself in San Francisco with no real support network around me. I had friends, but they were mostly partying friends and people in work. I didn't. We were all stressed really, and
Mhm.
yeah, all of a sudden I went from feeling like I was a young, invincible guy into realizing that I am far from invincible, and I've started to really hate myself, and I have these constant negative thought cycles, and I can't enjoy anything, and I can't sleep, and I feel like I can't really even talk to anyone about this because there's just so many elements to it.
Mhm.
And then you end up drinking more and partying more to try and get away from that negative thought cycle. And yeah, that's when I had my first proper burnout and was completely lost, is the only
Mhm.
way to describe it. And
That's crazy, man. It's crazy
mm,
as well, but the sleep side of it, are like, kind of how much you become like untangled. Like, I suppose you were just, all different aspects of your life are kind of falling down. And you may be aware of Johan Hari. He was
yeah,
on Joe Rogan before. He was on my podcast a couple of weeks ago, and he just wrote a book, Stolen Focus. You actually really, really like it. But it's interesting he said about sleep. So it was about sleep. It was about multiple different things. But what he was saying there was, in particular, was like, if you spend one night or one day working 17 hours a day, which, or you're awake for 17 hours. That's funny now. So if you're awake for 17 hours, you're pretty much operating at the same level of being drunk at that period. Okay. So everyone's like, okay, I'm probably not working for that long or not awake that long. But if you were to do it over 6 days, if you were just asleep for less than 6 hours for 6 days in a row, it's the same as being drunk and having the same inhibitions in your brain. You can't think. You're just getting so frustrated, and then you're going in this constant loop. And then this is where it was leading into the unfulfillment part. So
mm.
that's what I saw was pretty cool. So like, kind of what do you think was the main kind of catalyst? Do you think it was the fact that you were so stressed, and then that led to not being able to sleep, and then led to you, suppose, trying to work more to fill up the hours?
I think of multifactorial, to be honest.
Yeah.
If I was trying to sum it all up, though, I would say I was just inexperienced with life as well. I was naive, I didn't. And I had too high a risk tolerance probably across a lot of
Yeah.
the factors. And I had been running pretty well up until that point, and so I probably got too confident in the ability to take on more risk, and it was a terrible mistake, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But the sleep's a huge one across the board, and it's so misunderstood. And that Matthew Walker book, Why We Sleep, I'd recommend to absolutely anybody. And it ends up being such a contributing factor to cognitive function, relationships, physical wellness, so many things. But it's not, unless you have insomnia, which is a lot of people, it doesn't start as the initial cause, if you know what I mean. It ends up being a response to an initial cause that then massively exaggerates or amplifies everything. So
what do you think has been like the biggest driver in that? So do you think it's a failure on the individual level? Because like you were saying, you're in San Francisco and you're taking the piss and you're going out, maybe you could have probably taken it easy at some particular times, but do you think there's a pressure from companies, and in particular, like could be the startup space, that's saying, we need these targets to be hit, we need this work to be done? Because has this always been around and we have people like you that are more vocal about it now, or has this just kind of popped up?
I think it's always been around, for sure. And if you talk to the older generations, like we use this word startup as if it's something new. It just means a young business that's taking a lot of risk and moving fast. And it has an implication that there's venture capital involved. It doesn't necessarily mean that. And yeah, I think it's been around for sure. I mean, I think the demands on individuals has always been around. I think the time individuals have had in their day has changed, in the sense that we've very little time for disconnection now, or segmentation of different parts of our lives, due to always being connected. And I think pressure always would have been there before, but pressure is massively amplified by how frequently you're exposed to it. And if you're frequently exposed to it all the time, based on Slack message, WhatsApp messages, emails, all this jazz coming through, it definitely amplifies it. So actually, I take back my point and say it's probably increased based on the amount of hours or minutes in your day you're exposed to those demands.
Do you think that the output has increased? So let's say you are plugging Slack at fucking late at night and you're kind of more active in your brain. So for instance, like I'd wake up, always be thinking about work, go to bed, always think about work. I often leave anything to do with my life until the weekend, which is, I know this sounds even fucking terrible to explain, but if I have to plan something out, I always leave it to the weekend. But I'm trying to think, like, does that mean my work output has actually improved? I would nearly say sometimes for some individuals, because you're always distracted and you're not sleeping well and you're not recovering well, it's probably not.
So I really strongly believe it's in balance to your self-care. So I think you can handle that stress and increase output if you can manage your self-care routine appropriately. And by self-care, it's a catch-all term. I mean by how you're sleeping, how you're eating, how you're physically exercising. Meditation to me is just like the ultimate shortcut for that as well. The return you get over a 24-hour period if you meditate for 10 minutes in your day is, I don't think there's anything else that gives you a better ROI of time in terms of your cognitive throughput. So like if you can keep all of, and everyone's combination of self-care is different, based on your body type and what else you do in your life. Are you at a desk, are you not? Lots of things will determine what is best for each individual. But whatever that is for the individual, if they can keep that self-care routine up, I think they can handle that higher stress load and that always being on and not having disconnection. I think you have the tools there to manage it, to be able to optimize output.
And what type of like meditation has that been for you? Because I know people will look at it from different lenses. Like it could be like exercise and could be kind of therapeutic. If it's running in particular, they say that kind of like runners like mindset whereby they complete disconnect from everything. But for you in particular, I know you went down the kind of therapy route, but was there something that was really kind of able to improve your mental health and how you actually even just think about work?
I would double down on that point to say not just how I think about work, how you think about everything. So, I like to describe that inner voice as your inner monologue. So you have that train of thought that's running through your head, and you have between 40 and 50,000 thoughts every day. They move really fast. And a lot of us live in a reactionary state and believe that we've no input or much control over those thoughts that come through our awareness. And that is fundamentally incorrect. And you have to build up the muscle and what we call mental fitness to be able to understand and shape those thoughts. And meditation to me started off just as a medium for getting that inner monologue to tune down, to go from max speed at volume 10 to, so we'll say fifth gear at volume 10, down to third gear at volume 7, and then down to second gear at volume 2, and meditation was just a medium for me being able to tune that down, because when you're in a challenging period of time, you end up having a lot of negative thought cycles. And me in 2013, they were all negative cycles all the time. And then they just self-fulfill into more negative cycles, and it wears you down more and more. And so you need some sort of tool or exercise to tune that down. And I get what you're saying, which is there's many mediums or tools to tune down that inner monologue. And I view them as like a spectrum of those that are healthy and those that are unhealthy, in the sense that if you go for a run, you quite often can tune that inner monologue down, and you get that same utility, which is space from that inner monologue. And the gym is another one that lots of people really enjoy. Then you get into the more in the middle of the spectrum, you might say, binging on a Netflix series allows that inner monologue to turn off. And then you keep going down the like less healthy end of that spectrum, which still gives you a version of that utility. You get into getting on the booze. If you drink a lot, you end up turning off that voice. And people say you've less social inhibitions. You don't have a voice inside your head saying, don't talk to her, don't talk to him, they're not going to like you, you're not cool enough for that person. So, and then you go on further, and there's lots of other drugs and things that will give a similar experience. And you have this spectrum of different activities or mediums that give a similar kind of, they turn the inner monologue off, but the unhealthy ones have other massive trade-offs in addition to that want of turning the inner monologue off. And I don't need to get into that. I think everyone understands what those negative trade-offs would be. And then when you look at meditation as a singular activity to get that utility, it's the only one where you need nothing. You don't need anything else. You don't need anyone. You don't need space. All you need is just you and yourself. And that's why it's the ultimate, because, I'm in 21 days of hotel quarantine here in Hong Kong at the moment. I've been in this hotel room for 19 days.
Fucking crazy.
And it's a wild story in itself, but it's a great example of, if I needed to get that utility from, going to the gym or swimming or whatever else is in that healthy end of the spectrum, I can't right now, right? And there's lots of people that might be in an office or, in many different living environments that mightn't have access to some of those things, or the body type or whatever it might be. Whereas meditation is the only one where you need nothing. So for me, it was about having something that I could access all the time, because my negative thought cycles were constant. So if it was only just when I ran, that meant I had to be able to run many times in a day.
Yeah, fucking hell, because that's interesting, man, because like even for myself, training a lot, background in bodybuilding, and if I'm training 5 or 6 days a week, some days, Thursday or Friday, I could be like, oh, fuck this, it's actually not actually overall benefiting me. I do enjoy going in and I feel better afterwards, but when you're exhausted, it's probably not the best idea, because like you might want to rest or whatever. So like, what were some of the things you were doing? Because like in particular, so a bit of backstory, like, so first, how did you know you had to go and do some therapy and go and do some meditation and learn about this? Like, when was the trigger for you? Because a lot of guys don't particularly do that. And then what are some of the things you're actually doing then?
So that was not really my own creation in a way. I was lucky enough to be around some great people that pointed me in that direction. And I know this is the accurate use of the word lucky, because I've known lots of other people that haven't had that input into their lives when they were, crashing towards rock bottom. And basically there was this guy I knew who I kind of half worked with in San Francisco, and he was a really caring Greek guy named Chris, and he introduced me to this concept of meditation and gave me a couple of books, and he was really caring and wonderful human being, and wasn't a drinker, for one, didn't drink at all, and he educated me about this concept of meditation, and that's how I found it, really. And then, as I said, and Headspace was available at the time, and that was a great entry point for meditation. And then as I'll go back to your therapy point, but just to stick on the meditation thread for a second. Yeah. So I then unknowingly adopted meditation as my core self-care exercise as I started to feel more balanced and stronger in myself. And as I then traveled to other parts of the world over the following, that was 2013, it's now 2020. So the following 9 years, I got deeper and deeper into meditation. So for instance, when I was working with Web Summit, we did an event and essentially opened up a side of the business in India. And then I went after that to a meditation ashram in southern India for a few days to like try and expand my meditation, because I was doing lots of reading, and I was really it's kind of like a curve of increase of time, like how much time you commit to it on a weekly basis. Once you start getting the benefits, you're like, oh, let's go further. What more? Like, I want to grow on this path. So yeah, then I went to the Art of Living ashram in southern Bangalore, and then the following year I went to my first silent retreat in Bali in Indonesia, and incredible place in terms of the experience, and I'd loved being in Bali previous times, and so that felt right. And then the following one I went to was like a 10-day silent meditation course in Kathmandu in Nepal, and that was called Vipassana, which is pretty well known, and it's all over the world. And you can actually, if you're in Ireland and the UK, there's Vipassana centers in Ireland and the UK. You don't need to go to Nepal for it, and they don't charge you anything. It's amazing. You make a at choice contribution at the end, and they feed you and house you for the full 10 days. But I'm just kind of drawing that overall thread out over time to illustrate how you may start really struggling with meditation and only doing it for 5 minutes a day, twice a week, or once a week, or whatever it is. But if, like with physical exercise, the more you work on that fitness, the more capability you have and the more benefit you have. And then there's actually this whole world of meditation growth out there that have been around for thousands of years. So
yeah, I think it's you made that commitment as well, which is really cool. Like if it's like a silent retreat, or you're going to do it for a couple of days and you're building it into your process. Because I think people may kind of like start something, have the initial peak and then kind of go down, but not going off into a tangent. But what's your like thoughts on like psychedelics in relation to meditation? So there's a lot of kind of research kind of done on that as well. Do you have any kind of thoughts on it from, some of the books you read or some people you worked with maybe?
You've stumbled across a bit of a home run here. So I am a strong believer in the benefits of psilocybin, and it's with the correct dosage. So psilocybin is the active chemical in magic mushrooms, and psilocybin has recently, by a number of companies, been linked to psychedelic assisted therapy. And there's Compass Pathways in London is one of the leaders of research in it with Imperial College, and in the States, there's companies like Atai Life Sciences that have just done an IPO on it. So that's just to say it's a massively growing area, and it's an area that has a lot of research in it now. Previously, it would have been more anecdotal or experiential to illustrate how psilocybin can be a very supportive and enabling additional element to high quality therapy. And it's my genuine belief, Darren, it's the only thing that has the true not the only thing, it's one of the things that can completely change the game in terms of mental health. And when I say mental health, I don't mean just people that have trauma, which I know Johan Hari talks about a lot in that Lost Connections book, or PTSD, or like the more extreme things, even stuff like racism, or like any sort of like mental blind spots that people have around community, environment, all of those things like that are learnt blind spots, learnt as in, you don't get born with those, you learn it off the people you're around. I think therapy can solve that if it has the opportunity to solve that. But I think with psychedelic assisted therapy, it can happen a lot quicker. And the amazing thing about the whole industry of psychedelic assisted therapy is you're only at max going to have to take 3 doses over the course of your lifetime. And the current tests are with people with PTSD, which means they have like been in war and they've seen the worst things you and I could never imagine. So they have some of the most significant challenges. And it's not like people compare psilocybin within mental health space to, Xanax and Valiums and all of these prescription narcotics that were commercialized by, in my opinion, bad acting big pharma. But with psychedelic assisted therapy, that's not how it works. You don't go on a prescription. You're not taking it all the time. You go in, and in the morning, you do a couple of preparatory therapy sessions with this therapist. You build up a relationship, and then in the morning you go in and you get into a room. You get to know you continue getting to know your therapist, and then they give you your dose at around like 10:30 is the current process, and then you sit with your therapist over between 6 and 10 hours. Quite often with them holding your hand, you might have like an eye mask on, and they're basically guiding you through this mental health journey. And then you have sessions afterwards to like implement the changes that you saw. So yeah, I could talk to you for a while about this one. And my belief is very strong that it has lots of positive applications.
Don't worry, I'm the exact same as well, because like if you think about how narrow your scope becomes when you're living in the same world and the same like people every day and the same concept every day, that just like psychedelics does give you that perspective, the 3D perspective. But again, it's all like relative. Like, so you mentioned there about media and big pharma. So it's being obviously looked down on and saying, oh, it's taken advantage of, and people were using it for the wrong purposes. But obviously, under a medical lens, it does have an application and it does have an actual genuine purpose. So it's interesting you're saying there about how they measure it and they check, is it within your prescription and how much should we give, and then we do that retrospective look, because it's the same. This is for anxiety and depression, but it's the same for ketamine therapy. They do the exact same concept. They bring you in, do an assessment, and do microdosing of ketamine, which is hugely like a huge like breakthrough. And I actually know people personally that have done it, and every month, it's not one in Ireland, but every month they come in, they get their therapy, they get their ketamine, they do the step-by-step process, and then I think it's like 6 hours long or whatever, and then afterwards then they'll go implement out those changes. But it's cool because it lets the people who have PTSD open up this whole world that they've been neglecting. And it's even like me or you, if you were to ask me what are my biggest problems, I probably wouldn't even know what they are, and I probably wouldn't even be able to tell you exactly what they are, or at least articulate them as well. So yeah, I don't know, I'm a big believer in that as well. I think as time goes on, it should become more normalized and more understood.
Yeah, I think the context that makes people struggle with that is the whole Sackler family and the opioid epidemic, and how they basically flipped what was a death assisting drug of morphine and rebranded it into the best ever pain reliever. And I'm sure people have probably watched that show Dope Sick, and I read the book Empires of Pain, and if you haven't read it, it's way better than the TV show, because it goes into all of the business decisions they made to try and get that over the line. And like that's a huge crime against humanity, you might say. And that really throws a bad shadow over a lot of this conversation that is relative to either ketamine or psilocybin assisted therapy in general, which is important to note that it's very, very different for commercial reasons, and because of the chemical reasons, like it's a fundamentally different thing. So to compare it doesn't make sense.
It's interesting as well because it's all driven by, as you said, like the business case, the use cases behind it, how media have portrayed it. Funny enough, some of the statistics around opioid addiction and drug overdose in the States are higher now than ever, as a result of like COVID, not access to their therapists and whatnot, or any sort of medical help. So all those kind of like acute problems are being exacerbated. I know we're going kind of off rails a small bit, but there was it was an interesting guy who was on Lex Friedman who was discussing this. It was the impact of lockdowns and the indirect effects that we don't anticipate. So the example was the people who would normally have gotten treated for some things that weren't as serious. You know, they're not feeling too good today. They want to go to see a doctor. Their head's kind of sore, or, you know, they're thinking very negatively, and that will go on and on and on. And it was increasing to more suicides. It was increasing to a lot more mental health issues. And yeah, like, I don't know, it just kind of goes back to the core, doesn't it?
Oh, 100%. Yeah. It's been an absolute game-changing challenge for everyone's mental health over the last 2 years, and it's no joke, you know. And I think some countries have been much better at being open about that. Shout out to Leo Varadkar and the Irish government in terms of, like, when he gave his first public address about this concept of going into like a lockdown at home, one of the first things he said was about anxiety and, you know, the mental health challenge of it. And that was the first time I'd ever heard a politician mention something about mental health. And it was right around that time that we had started building Frankie as well, in early 2020. And actually, going back to your other question, which was around how I got involved in therapy or speaking to a therapist. So back in 2013, again, I was lucky enough to get introduced to a therapist back in Ireland. And the reason I got introduced to a therapist here is because my mum started one of the first private psychotherapy practices in Ireland in the 1990s. So she has been a big, she's not going to like me saying big member of the community in Ireland, but I've talked to a lot of people, and she's been in it a long time, and she's been a massive support of lots of people's mental health professionally, and then also was able to make an introduction to me to a therapist back home I was able to do calls with. And that's how it started when I had that really tough time. And I've had that relationship since then. So I still have that relationship, and I've obviously lived in all different parts of the world. And so I kind of lived the experience of, you know, video therapy, because I was introduced to a great therapist, and I was living abroad. And obviously that's been a massive part of what we've done with Frankie, is the belief that video mental health services is extremely effective and has lots of massive positives. It's never going to fully replace face-to-face, but the research that's come out in the last year and a half or so shows that it's as effective and has lots of other benefits around accessibility. So
100%.
That's how I got into it. Back then it was way less talked about than it is now. And thankfully, one of the tailwinds or secondary effects of COVID is that people have been talking about mental health way more. Everyone has gone through a period of difficult mental health over the last 2 years. And so when everyone goes through something, it automatically normalizes it. And when something becomes normalized, it's a beautiful byproduct is that stigma gets eroded a bit more, or significantly so. So yeah, that's kind of the entry point for me into therapy.
What's interesting too there is, like, as I mentioned, my girlfriend's from the States, and like in America they kind of like talk about things and they're a bit more like kind of like vocal, and like in the States it's very like normalized. But in Ireland, especially amongst men, it's not really talked about a lot, because it's kind of like, just kind of get on with it. Like the Irish
Yeah.
perspective is just like, I don't know, I don't agree with a lot of times, like a lot of that kind of like lad mentality. It's just kind of like, kind of get on with it. I don't know. But anyway, that's why it's kind of cool for like yourself to kind of come forward with a lot of this stuff, because I don't know, it kind of gives guys more accessibility to it. And accessibility is a great thing. Like, because if you think about even your platform or us at Revolut, like I've never met an employee, but I've been creating more and more stuff over the last year and a bit, you know? So it's not like we needed to be in person. So I wouldn't discredit and say that, oh, your platform is not going to give the same value, because it absolutely will. I think it will, you know. Maybe people want to be physically with someone, maybe shake their hand and get that kind of emotional connection. But I think for guys who want to do it even in silence, you know, they don't want to walk into a therapy room. Maybe they don't want to be seen on Grafton Street or whatever the fuck it is, you know. There's all these kind of things to factor in. So maybe it's actually more beneficial that it's actually remote. Maybe it's more beneficial that it's integrated to a company. It can kind of give you that bit of kind of anonymous vibe.
Yeah, so there's lots of great points you've unpacked there. The first is, you know, like the benefit of accessibility in terms of effective matching. So before our industry really started taking off, on average, it was you needed to speak or be introduced to 3 therapists or counselors before you found one that was a good fit. And if you talk to any therapist that is really experienced, they'll tell you that, yeah, their training is super important and the qualification is super important, but one of the biggest factor is like just the connection that you can build with someone. You know, like trust is so fundamental to every relationship, but even more so to a professional one and a clinical one like that. So that therapeutic process really runs on the context of the space between both therapist and client, and the therapist obviously is one of the main creators of how that space is forged. But if you think how crazy and scary it is that it was previously on average for every 3 you get 1 good match. And I have friends that would have went to therapists that did more damage than good. And, you know, that's because they didn't know where to go. And you know, they just try to figure it out themselves. And that happens. And that's a lost statistic because nobody knows it, but it's within that 1 in 3 stat that was previously the norm, that's hidden, unfortunately. And to me, I experienced that firsthand with friends, and that is just nothing gets me more annoyed. I'm annoyed thinking about it right now, to be honest with you. So that's a huge factor in it. The other factor around accessibility is there are some shortages and specialities in different markets. You know, for instance, there's no sex therapists in Ireland, and I think, you know, people hear me say sex therapy and I bet you they think like, you know, 2 couples going in and talking about how they physically connect, but it's quite often not to do with that. It can be about, you know, porn issues, which is a massive problem globally within young men at the moment. It can be around, you know, any more physical challenges someone might have, or even like how they engage with a partner. Like, you know, so it can be very personal as well. It's not just in the context of a relationship. And through Frankie, the practices that we worked with were able to onboard and offer high quality sex therapists in Ireland to Irish people because they were able to find great therapists in the UK. And we've actually found lots of other examples of that when you start getting into the therapy markets around the world, of where there mightn't be a good school for this certain form of specialty, and therefore those therapists aren't available in that locality. And we've recently launched coaches in Frankie as well. So we have all different types of coaches, and it's applied even more in that space because there's so many niches around men's health, women's health, new parents, sleep, you know, executive coaching. There's lots of different subcategories and niches. So therefore you have shortages of supply in some areas. And ultimately that's one of the biggest challenges or areas we need to improve in the mental health services, which is shortage of supply. And digital platforms really help to solve shortage of supply and increase the effectiveness of the matching.
Yeah, because like when you're providing that platform, you're giving people an option. Because a lot of people, if you told them go figure it out in Dublin or Cork or wherever in Ireland, the UK, it's like, where do I begin? So, you know, by you having that platform, that kind of gives people that option. But one thing I wanted to say about this as well was like, for you going to build this, like it's a pretty big undertaking. You know, it's not like you're creating a fucking SaaS model for something, you know, an accounting system that doesn't have money. Is like there's a lot of risks involved in what you're doing, you know. So like, how did you kind of get that right? Like, what did you kind of really kind of focus on? Because I suppose it's a sensitive topic, rightly so. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a therapist. There's getting a right kind of matching, and this is not even going into the model that you've built, which I kind of would like to touch on if a bit of time on as well. But what are some of those kind of challenges?
Well, first of all, shout out to my co-founder Seb Poole, because you know, we did it together and couldn't do it without him. And there's lots of challenges, man. I don't even know where to start with that one. You know, I think where I'll just focus on is, you know, you have to make decisions when you're building a product. And I'm sure you felt this in Revolut, but you feel even more so in a startup when you're making so many decisions, both in the product, commercially, you know, comms and external marketing, whatever it might be. There's all these decisions you have to make. And a lot of companies talk a good talk, and they just know it's the right spiel, if you know what I mean. But we fundamentally made a series of core decisions at the start of Frankie, Seb and I, around, you know, our beliefs of and research into what high quality mental health support should be. And anecdotally, 1 or 2 of those might be, you know, the fact that the norm within workplace mental health support is that everyone has a limit of sessions in a year of usually 6 sessions. That's the standard. And, you know, in some cases, you might have an exceptional situation of 12 sessions in a year. But already in our community, we're seeing that that's just, you can't apply it one size fits all when everyone has all these different mental health challenges. And so we made a decision there at the very start, which was we need to take what works in the private space, which we had good exposure to, and bring it into the corporate or employee wellness space. And so, you know, you have to make a series of massive product and comms decisions on the back of that. And yeah, then you have to make like privacy and data decisions. Like we don't want certain, we actually don't get much data on someone's mental health. Like we get these clinical assessments that they complete, but we don't have any access to the conversation with therapists. We don't, it's an end-to-end encrypted room. We don't have access to anything that's said within that data package of the video or the audio. And we don't support therapist notes on our platforms. We don't want the therapist to write notes on our platform. We don't want that data. So like that, you make fundamental commercial and product decisions based on the values that you're trying to build.
So. You were lucky in that instance as well that you knew what you were doing. Like you knew that you weren't gathering data on like, you know, clients' information or whatnot, probably from your previous experience and even with your family, because I suppose what you don't want there is to go down the rabbit hole of doing something and then having to fucking rework it and say, oh, Jesus, we were wrong on that, you know, because there were some things I was saying as well. There was like considerations and concerns because I suppose that's what people are looking for is like, how is the data going to be used? And also, you know, when you're making this model, which is assessing someone's mental health, how do you know like what to recommend them, let's say, or how do you know that it's going, you know, slightly skewed? Is there certain benchmarks you're using? Like how is this calculated?
So there's basically a clinical assessments for anxiety, stress, depression, and burnout. And so they're a clinical grade. So if you go into any clinical setting and they're trying to get a data point on anxiety, for instance, they'll use the General Anxiety Disorder 7 assessment, GAD-7, and it's multiple choice interaction. So, and then each response has a number value against it. So we use those. We didn't create our own, and we basically digitized it, and no one had really done that yet. And that allowed us to have like a clinical data point on someone's anxiety or stress or, you know, depression, whatever one is more applicable to the individual set of challenges. And then we essentially like augment that with other data points that we create based on our platform. So, you know, we've integrations to pretty much most wearables now. So, you know, an obvious one is if someone falls out of their exercise routine, that they're potentially heading towards burnout. The other one is, you know, someone's sleep, depending on what wearables they use. That's another big data point. And so there's lots of data points that we then augment on top of that clinical one. But the clinical one is one of the most important, to be honest with you. Yeah.
That's interesting. You know, when you take in the exercise and like sleep, is it compared against their existing one or is it compared against the clinical studies? Because for instance, let's say I'd be very, very active and very healthy. So probably a little bit above actually what's like recommended. But then sometimes I might go back to baseline and it could be better off for me physically. I don't know. How does that work?
I mean, it's different for everyone. So we definitely don't use the predetermined benchmark. So it'll be based on someone individually. And at the start, when you've less data, you just lean on the clinical assessments more, right? Because you've less context to how and what's going on in their life. So it would be based on the individual's trends.
And then what are you recommending afterwards? And do you pair them with therapists initially, or do you pair them with, or do you match up exercises and some of the meditation exercises that you were recommending?
Yeah, so it's never a situation where Frankie knows the answer and tells you the answer. It's always a situation where Frankie takes hundreds of possible supports and tries to shortlist them and make that decision-making process easier for you. So in a, you know, when someone onboards into Frankie, they tell us what their goals are, and they tell us their experience with different parts of mental health supports. And they'll also tell us, you know, when in their day they want to maybe commit some time to their mental wellness, and they'll tell us how much time that they have. And, you know, based on that, we have these habits that you try and complete and build up, you know, like a lot of days that you're hitting your habits. And, you know, that will be based on the data points that we've got from you, the goals you've told us, the availability that you have in terms of time, because that was one thing we learned the hard way, which is like we had like really high quality meditations and psychoeducation pieces that could be 15, 20 minutes long. And we're like, they're the best thing that you could be doing, but people just don't have the time. And so we then started creating short bite-sized versions, like 1 to 2 minute psychoeducation audio pieces that then you can consume in Slack as well. And so you need to take all those things into consideration. But on the therapy side, again, we shortlist. So, we'll come up with 3 or 4 different therapists that are potentially a good fit. But it's, especially on therapy, it's super important to stress that the individual, the client, has to make that commitment in themselves. They have to want to go into it. They have to make that commitment, is the best way to put it, and make that selection process. And then we just try and make that easy. So, we try and reduce the step into the unknown, which is some of the most intimidating parts of speaking to a therapist or coach. So we have profiles and they answer questions about who they are as a person, their approach to therapy. And then the other thing is just making it easy. So we have built our own Calendly type feature, so you can see real-time availability, and you can basically book in your call within 4 clicks of being in the Frankie platform, and then the end-to-end encrypted room is scheduled for you.
Yeah, it's a real USP, man. I actually really, really enjoy it, because if you compare it to like BetterHelp or one of those other platforms, kind of a lot of friction kind of involved, and there's a lot of messages, and it's all like payments coming in, and like I remember even seeing before, like there was payments of like €300 or whatever, but you don't even know what you're going to get. They're like saying like pay now, pay now. Now again, I'm not shitting on the platform. I imagine it's helped thousands of people, but there's those considerations too. So just to finish up on like, what's the general roadmap from here? Like, is your plan to sign with a lot of companies, individuals? What's your focus?
There's a few focuses, but growth is the short-term answer. The quick fire answer, I should say. But for us, we had a big goal to launch really high quality coaches in the platform, and we did that at the start of January this year, and we're seeing incredible response from our community around the coaches. And we also have a big goal around developing our IP to identify burnout ahead of time, so to get preventative with it. And that's all that secret sauce around understanding the data points as much as possible and then validating it against the clinical. So they're probably our big objectives there. But growth, I mean, as I said, I'm in Hong Kong at the moment. We're going to launch in Hong Kong and Singapore in the next kind of in the middle of March is our kind of goal at the moment. We launched in Australia just before Christmas in around October. We're live in Ireland and the UK. So yeah, growth into those markets, keep doubling down on the parts of the platform that is getting the most or returning the most positive impact. And that's it.
Growth and product, man. It always goes back to it in the startup world. James, I want to say a massive thank you. I really, really appreciate it. And lastly, where can people find your platform and your details?
Yeah, it's just frankie.health. So the website, the domain is .health. So Frankie, FRANKIE.health, HEALTH. And you can check me out on LinkedIn, James McGann, MCGANN. And we've had a lot of really amazing people apply to join the company, and we're always interested in meeting new people. So please do reach out at any stage. And if your company doesn't have mental health support to the level that you think you and your team deserve, reach out to us via our website, and we'd love to have a chat.